Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. This is the second time I've recorded this show. I had Kathy sitting behind the camera earlier and she kept bouncing it around. I looked like I was in an earthquake. Let's pick up where I left off. Chapter 3, San Antonio. Traffic began to build as the Deathmobile cruised along I-35 and entered the city limits. Pam had her cell phone on GPS so she could find the half-price bookstore with as little yelling and cursing as possible. Exit right now! Pam was in the left-hand lane. Hitting the gas and the blinker at the same time, Pam shot across 4 lanes and made it onto the exit ramp, just in front of a bus filled with kids. The kids all began to wave and smile at her. Then Pam realized they were looking at the car, not her. Exit right now! Darn it! The GPS had a very demanding but somewhat slow communication. Pulling off the loop and onto the feeder, Pam saw a sign for the Old Austin Highway, which would lead her to Broadway Street and the store she sought. As the zoo appeared on the right, Pam slowed so she could pull into the parking lot and finally be half done with this mission. She hoped it was the longer half and not just a quarter of it. How might I help you today? The man behind the counter was smiling as if Pam were his best customer. I'm here for Ray Bogus. He ordered a book from you. The smile vanished like a donut at a police convention. It was replaced by a frown. Oh, that thing. Come with me. It's out back. He led Pam back to the parking lot. The building out back looked like it had been a garage at one time. A sign hung from the door announcing, by appointment only. Pulling a ring of keys from his pocket, the proprietor unlocked the double doors and waved Pam into the room beyond. The room was filled with boxes that were filled with books of every size and genre possible. For such a cluttered mess, the space was clean and free of spiders or dust. Every space was filled with the exception of the one counter. There was only one book on that counter, just the one. The book was about 24 inches by 16 inches by 2, with a leather cover that had been hand-tooled by an expert in this ancient craft. The carving on the cover looked to be of small beings engulfed in what looked like a winter scene. They didn't look as if they were having a good time. As Pam stepped up to the counter, the proprietor hung back. I like books. I really like books. You could say I love books. With a good book, you can travel the world and see sights unimaginable. You can leave the planet and visit other galaxies. That, he pointed to the sole occupant of the counter, is not a good book. Pam hesitated to touch in case something reached out and bit her. Having worked at the Bogus Anomalous Group long enough to have seen some things that made no sense at all. Here, you might want these. The owner handed Pam a set of work gloves. Touching that thing makes my skin crawl. It's icky. He shook his hands as if trying to dislodge snail goo from his fingers. Pulling on the heavy leather work gloves, Pam hefted the volume up, surprised at how much it weighed. Turning towards the entrance, the proprietor made certain to stay as far away as possible. Once out in the fresh air and sunshine, Pam walked over to her vehicle. "Looks like you brought the appropriate kind of transportation." The owner looked at the hearse. He was nice enough to open the back door, allowing Pam access to the corpse container. The book took up no room in the back whatsoever. "Do I need to sign anything?" Pam turned to the proprietor. He was already running back into his sanctuary as if afraid Pam might not take the book and try to return it. "No, we're good. Mr. Bogus wired me the cash. Enjoy your—" The rest was cut off as the door swung shut. Pam thought just for a second he may have locked the door. "Okay, thank you. I'll be on my way then." Pam addressed the air around her. "Well, I'm half done. Now I just have to get home." She hesitated, starting the vehicle, still unable to stop or lower the music coming from the 8-track. Pam stopped at a gas station so she could possibly cruise by the Twilight Zone gas station without any incidents. Now, with a full tank of gas and most of her dignity intact, it was time to head back home. Checking her watch, Pam saw it was 6 p.m. This day can't end too soon for me. She settled back and tried to relax, enjoy the scenery, and not think about anything. What about the ghost investigation tonight? Oh, shoot, Pam had forgotten the appointment for 11 tonight. I'll just call and reschedule. She didn't have the phone number. I'll just call the office and ask for the... At 6, the chances of catching anyone at the office was not very good. Pam hit the call button for her office. It rang, and then it rang some more. There was no such thing as an answering machine. The last one was just a pile of steaming scrap sitting in the bottom of a drawer of her desk. Machines just didn't work at work. Driving along I-35 and listening to the sound of an unanswered phone, Pam wondered how she was going to fix this latest mistake. "What?" The phone was answered by a gruff-sounding male. Pam considered just hanging up. There was no caller ID, so Mr. Armstrong would not know it was her. "Pamela Bogus, is that you? Why are you calling me when it's your job to answer the phone, not mine?" His question demanded a snappy answer. "And what is that horrible racket you're listening to? Some kind of evil noise?" Mr. Armstrong preferred the classics, as in 50s rock. Mr. Armstrong, how's everything?" Pam remembered he hated small talk. "Quit with the small talk. You're wasting my time. What do you want?" His voice was growing angry and nasty at the same time. Pam wanted to throw her phone out the window so she could sever her tie to this angry man. Mr. Armstrong was a semi-licensed investigator. He worked... I lost my place. He worked for her uncle as a troubleshooter. More shooting than solving, but he did come in handy when dealing with demons or monsters or angry old ladies. "I need a phone number. It's written down in the spiral notebook on my desk." Pam hoped he was in the reception area and not his office, which was in the attic since his other office had been destroyed. If he had to climb down 3 sets of stairs just to give her a number that he would consider her duty to have taken with her before exiting the office, he would not be happy. But then, when was he ever happy? Pam remembered that day at the mall when Mr. Armstrong had been unloading his automatic assault shotgun with double-aught buck and holy water mixed with jalapeno juice into Demon Waldo. That was the only time he had looked happy. Does it say ghost hunt tonight? He nearly sounded civil. Yes, that's it. Pam grabbed her pencil and a piece of paper, which she popped on the horn button of the steering wheel. She honked the horn a few times as she tried to write down the phone number as Mr. Armstrong read it from her notes. Thank you, sir. This is. Gotta go. Click. Once more, Mr. Armstrong had hung up on her, making Pam feel just the tiniest bit uncomfortable. Looking at her phone, as if she might discern why Mr. Armstrong was such an angry old man, old as in 45, which to a 17-year-old was pretty old, Pam got no answer to her inquiry. Oh well, she punched in the number he'd given her and then listened to the sound of ringing. A voice came over the speaker. It was speaking in Russian. Hello? Is this? Pam couldn't remember the name of the person who had requested the ghost investigation. Then she remembered the caller hadn't really given her a name. More Russian came over the speaker. I seem to have the... Pam thought maybe the person on the line didn't speak English. Is that you again, you crazy girl? You stop calling me. It's 3 a.m. I don't wish to have to sick KGB on you. Click. Pam thought that just maybe the man on the phone sounded an awful lot like Vladimir Putin. I better get Mr. Techno to check my phone again. Pam considered calling the office once more to ask for the address to the house where the ghost hunt was supposed to occur. But tonight it would be better to just drive up and down every street in her town than have to ask Mr. Armstrong for more help. The piece of paper Pam had pulled from her purse so she could write down the number that Mr. Armstrong had given her that put her in contact with the President of Russia had some writing on the back. Flipping it over, Pam saw an address written there that she didn't recognize, but just knew it belonged to the property she had promised to investigate for tonight at 11 p. This is just plain weird. The road was getting longer as the sun dropped from view behind the trees. Pam called her mother to check in and let her know she would be running late again, as usual. Since being hired by her uncle, Pam had never gotten home before dark and managed to work most weekends. Her schedule was the thing she used to know at what time she would not be doing something. Hi, Mom. I just called to let you know I'm running late. Pam, dear, are you sure you're not working too hard? Paula Bogus had been very instrumental in getting Pam a job in the first place. Learn some responsibility, she'd said. Earn some money, she had said. It had all started when Paula and Albert, a.k.a. Mom and Dad, had taken a Dave Ramsey course on financial peace. Act your wage. Sound familiar? Paula was beginning to think maybe she should have pointed her eldest and youngest and only offspring to inquire towards a job at something less demanding, like maybe the police department or the fire department, something safer. What's that horrible noise in the background? You're not hanging out with that lowlife Bob, are you? Bob had been a classmate who unwittingly, which was the way he went through life, released a demon on the planet. No, ma'am. I wouldn't even let him in the same city as me if I had a choice. Pam was getting sick and tired of people asking if she was dating, let alone hanging out with, what she considered the worst human, if he was human, being on Earth. After all, the usual and some unusual small talk that goes from daughter to mother in just about any conversation, Pam hit the end button. Her folks had already heard about her out-of-the-ordinary abilities. They just had no idea what all she was doing with them. Pam began to recognize the landscape that meant she was getting close to the Twilight Zone gas station and store. She planned to drive by and not stop, even if the vehicle burst into flames. Just up ahead was the driveway and parking lot. The lot was empty. There was no sign of a building or any gas pumps. This was such a jolt to Pam, she found herself slowing down and pulling over into the empty lot. Stepping from the driver's door, Pam searched for any indication there had been a gas station here earlier. She could just make out her tire tracks from the dramatic and dynamic exit she had performed leaving earlier today. The twin streaks looked fresh, if tire tracks on cement can look fresh, nice and dark. The smell of burned rubber was still there. This is just plain weird, Pam thought. She could come up with a new catchphrase. What sounded like laughter came to her from the trees along the back of the lot. This was all it took to get Pam back into her vehicle and out onto the road once more. Pam pulled to the curb in front of what she guessed was the house where the ghost hunt was scheduled for a half hour ago. It was 11:50. Stepping from her ride, Pam looked at what looked like an abandoned building. This wasn't deterring her in the least bit. The building she worked out of looked far worse than this place. What was getting to her was the sudden and uncalled for cold wind blowing from down the street. Pam shivered as she walked up the walk and onto the front porch. She knocked on the door and then rubbed her arms, trying to warm up a bit. Here it was the middle of July, and it was cold out. Not cool as in a pleasant evening for a walk. It was cold as in, where's my coat? Her legs were asking her why she had worn a dress instead of ski pants. Hello? Anyone home? I'm sorry I'm late, but I got held up at a haunted gas station. Kind of. Just as she was about to head back to the hearse and turn the heater on, the door swung open. The woman who had opened the door stood in shadows. She hadn't bothered to turn on any lights. Ah, you're here. I was hoping you'd come. I don't know what to do or who to turn to. I hope you can help me. She waved a hand to entice Pam to enter. Pam walked into the dark hallway, knowing full well this was the opening scene in a horror movie. She had this same sense of foreboding. So often it was becoming a part of her daily routine. Every doorway was the portal to a dimension of otherworldly horrors. So, what exactly is it that you need looking into? Pam thought she should work on her inquiry spiel. The woman turned and walked along the darkened corridor, winding up in what must be the kitchen. The room was lit by a fire burning on the stove. 2 of the 4 burners were going, spreading some light and just a bit of warmth throughout the old-fashioned galley. They took a couple of seats next to an old-fashioned kitchen table. Pam considered the darkened house as being way too much atmosphere. Is there a reason for the lack of illumination? Could you turn on a light or two? The woman just stared in the near darkness. I'm afraid there's something wrong with the power. I can't seem to turn on any lights. I'll get someone out tomorrow to have a look. She sounded cold and unfriendly. Pam believed this to be just one more colorful person in her life. There had been a lot of them here lately. I've lived here for years. I had no idea there was a problem with the house until recently. I keep seeing strange people walking around my house at all times of the day. They walk around and they talk as if I'm not here. I tried yelling at them. I tried pushing them out the door. Nothing works. I think they must be ghosts. She said this as if admitting she had lice. Pam began to think maybe she could help out. I've been known to see and sometimes talk to those that have passed on. On one occasion, Pam had served real ghost beer to a real live ghost. She wondered how to begin. In the past month, all the ghosts and monsters had just appeared to Pam. She didn't have to call them out of hiding or entice them to show themselves. It was more like, bam, there they were. There were none of the electronic gizmos the ghost investigators used in the company car. Pam didn't even have a recorder. Is there any place that they appear most often? The woman answered, No, I've seen these apparitions in every room in the house, including the bathroom. You mean like when you're on the... Several times. This led to an uncomfortable silence. A plan slipped into Pam's mind. Hopefully a good one, and not one of those plans that led to someone, especially Pam, winding up in an open grave or lost in Mirrorland. Is there any chance of them showing up tonight? The woman considered this question. I've never seen any ghosts at night, but I'm usually asleep or out during the dark hours. Pam began to wonder if this strange woman might just be a vampire. Nah, her skin was too dark. I'm sorry, but I never did get your name, Miss Sharma Daruka. Miss. Pam thought she understood now. This woman was from another culture. She probably was up late at night so she could call her relatives on the other side of the planet. Here's what I'd like to do, if you'll agree. I'll come by tomorrow. Pam looked at her watch. Make that later today with some of the other investigators, and we'll bring our equipment. I wasn't able to bring any tonight since I had to drive out of town. It's just that I don't want the neighbors to think there's anything odd going on. I get enough weird looks as it is. Sharma glanced over at the closed window as if expecting to see the neighbor looking in. Pam got up from her chair. We are the epitome of discretion. Why, just last week we did a ghost hunt at the mayor's house and we never mentioned it to a soul. Oops. I'd best get going. It's just a bit late. She hoped this wasn't going to be a repeat of her first week on the job. After gassing up and parking the company car in its hangar and removing the Cheese Woo's sculpture of her sinuses, which she threw into the dark recesses of the storeroom, Pam carried the latest acquisition from the library into the office. Since the library coffee shop was kept locked after hours, not because there were hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of books, but because there were thousands of dollars worth of coffee, she placed the oversized book on the shelf behind her desk. There were dozens of volumes there that she used every day to look up questions and answer inquiries, since using a computer was a non-starter. Man, I've got to see about getting my schedule worked on. What schedule? You're turning into a workaholic. Tell me about it. The voices were becoming a regular part of Pam's life. Once Pam got home, she longed for 14 or 20 hours of sleep. The blouse might be saved. The yellow stain was in an artistic pattern. It almost looked as if it had been created by some skilled artist working in an old, musty studio, about to become the latest thing in Paris. Just want sleep. Pam kicked off her right shoe, and then she tried to remove the left. It didn't want to come off. She shook her foot, then tried pushing with her right. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Pam grabbed the shoe with both hands and pulled, and then pushed, and then twisted. The shoe refused any attempt at removal. She got her foot up close enough to glance at the offending high heel. The cheese had somehow dried and glued the shoe to her foot. Great. Now what am I supposed to do? With 21st century schizoid man playing inside her head, Pam tried to get some sleep. Chapter 4. government work. Pam woke to the sound of her phone ringing. Cat's driving here. Go away. Busy, she mumbled what she thought was an intelligent answer. Pam, this is your mom. Time to get up. It's nearly 9 a.m. I don't want to go to school. I got a headache. You're late for work. I'm at the hair salon. I called thinking you would already be on your way to work so I could tell you we are going to go to Dallas tonight. Your dad is being recognized for his latest innovations at work. They're giving him an award tonight? Pam rolled out of bed and onto the floor. No, sleepyhead, tomorrow. We're driving over tonight so we don't have to drive over tomorrow. The sound of her mother staring at her came through the line. Remember, we told you about it last Saturday. Anyway, since you said you had to work, I was just calling to tell you goodbye in case we don't see you tonight. The sound of her mother's displeasure at Pam's working so late every night came through the phone. All the usual I love yous and be carefuls were said. You'd best get going if you want to get to work by noon. See you Friday. Click. Pam lifted herself up from the floor of her room and went to the closet to find appropriate items to face the day in. As she walked across the room, Pam felt as if one leg had grown 2 inches longer during the night. Looking down, she saw the left shoe was still stuck to her foot. Oh, am I supposed to get dressed with that thing stuck on me? Try soaking it in gasoline. Isn't that a little bit dangerous? I'd start with water. Pam ran the water in her bathtub, sticking her foot, shoe and all, under the cascading liquid. Talk about feeling weird. The shoe refused to budge. A half bottle of nail polish remover finally did the trick. The shoe was a total loss, and her foot was an odd yellow color. Pam would have to replace it sometime later, but now it was way past time she was at the office. Opening the front door, Pam was shocked, as she gets a lot of shocks in her life, to find it was cold outside. She ran back to her room and dug her moon boots out from under her bed and then grabbed her jacket. I hope it warms up soon. This is getting just plain... She tried to think of a better catchphrase. Weird. The waiting area, not really a room, just a space around Pam's desk, was full of people waiting to see whichever of the staff they were there to see. Pam clomped over to her chair, only to find Prince Guapo de Cuerpo was sound asleep in it. He was big enough to be intimidating. All the chairs were in use, so Pam just stood behind her desk and got busy. Who all is here to see a healer? She began sending people either upstairs or down the hall, depending on their needs. When the waiting customers were all dealt with, Pam went to get her morning cup of joe and see what Eddie had in the way of food. Morning, sunshine. Eddie was in the process of dusting Wanda, as she'd gotten a thick layer of dust and cobwebs lately. He'd been busy reshelving all the books the staff had pulled from the shelves but neglected to replace when Pam and Sarah were being threatened by Demon Waldo. Once more, if you neglected to read the Bag Company #1, you missed a lot of vital information. The library was still in need of some attention. Eddie had brought in all of his kids, all 5 of them, to help. His wife Patty had finally come to their rescue, saying they had better things to do than work as slaves in the library. So there were still stacks of books piled in every open space in need of shelving. Eddie placed a double Americano with lots of sugar and some fancy pants creamer he had just received from Stanley Varkolak, who owned a grocery distribution company, and he was a werewolf. What's up with the jacket? Feeling sick? Eddie was in his usual t-shirt and blue jeans. The shirt had a decorated skull from Mexico emblazoned on the front. Pam noticed it was a bit warm in here. It was cold this morning, well, earlier when I left home. She pulled her jacket off. I have that book Uncle Ray bought from San Antonio. Where do you want it? She looked around at the partial mess that had been a biblical maze 2 weeks ago. Why don't you hang on to it? I need to pick up some more first. Once I get these babies back to their homes, I'll see about a spot for a new one. Eddie was the company barista, electronics wizard, and librarian. Any idea what it's about? Pam had learned never to open a book unless you knew what it contained first. Casual flipping could lead to casual disaster. Not a squeak. Your uncle received a message from some unknown person who said he should look into the manuscript. You know how your uncle is. Any suggestion is a mission to him. Pam was about to say it was odd, but then everything around the bag company was odd. Hello? Is there anyone here? Someone was in the lobby. Pam went back to her desk. Standing in front of her bureau was a very tall man in a very expensive-looking suit. Welcome to the Bogus Anomalous Group. How might we help you today? I wish to speak with your proprietor, or if not, might I speak to whomever is in charge? Pam thought about who she could pawn this suspicious-looking character off on. No one actually ran the group. It was more like a loose confederacy of like-minded souls that all hung out together and tried to earn a living. True, her uncle owned the building, and she collected the earnings, but as far as boss was concerned, that was hard to decide. Pam went with the safest path she could identify. What is it you're wishing to discuss or have handled or fixed? Your name is Pamela Bogus. You're Raymond Bogus's niece. Currently, you're attending school at Central High. Your grade point average is 3.2. Wow, Pam was impressed. He must be a psychic looking for a place to ply his trade. Correct on all accounts. Are you looking for office space? We're currently refurbishing the lower parts of the mansion. We should have more room quite soon. Pam felt her GPA needed defending. I'd be doing much better in class if the teachers would base their tests in history as seen on the History Channel. Once the ghosts of the Civil War soldiers had killed the giant worm that had been terrorizing everyone brave enough or foolish enough to venture down into the darkness below, the space had become usable. Oh no, I'm not one of those weirdos. We're looking to employ their services. The man turned and looked behind his shoulder as if expecting someone to be there, eavesdropping on their conversation. What is it you need looked into? Pam decided to ignore what definitely sounded like a slight to their abilities. The suspicious-looking man leaned in close, way too close. We need someone with impeccable discretion. Pam tried to assuage what would appear to be a very well-off potential customer. Oh, we're just brimming with discretion. Just last month we worked for the State Park Services and nobody knows anything about it. He leaned in even in closer. We would like to hire your very best operative. Pam leaned back. Her personal space was feeling the pinch. Let me consult our staff and see which one can fulfill your requests. Pam slipped from her desk and made a beeline for the coffee shop. Mr. Techno, which one of the staff would you say is the best psychic? Pam saw her coffee cup was still there where she had left it. That's easy. It would be you. He was busily sorting out books so they would someday be shelved in some kind of order. No, I mean one of the staff that is good at psychic stuff, okay? Cat? Stop it. I've got Kathy sitting in my lap, so now Chance is sitting behind the camera doing his nonsense. Why me? Oh, because I'm the one with all the cats. No, I mean one of the staff that is good at psychic stuff. Still you. He pointed a finger at her so she would be absolutely certain who the you was he was referring to. But I'm not. Yes, you are. Seeing ghosts, hearing voices, psychic stuff. Pam took her coffee cup back to her desk. It looks as if I'm the one you want. The suited guy looked at Pam as if seeing her for the first time. Our records don't show you having any weird abilities. Pam thought about this last bit. You have records on me? She looked the suit up and down. Just who are you, anyway? The suit looked around the room to be sure her and him, and of course the giant cat, were the only ones present. I work for the government. He did that nothing suspicious going on here look once more. You might just know us as the Secret Science Service. This last was just above a whisper. His ID appeared in one hand and flashed before Pam's eyes just long enough to see a badge and a photo that looked like him. I'm going to have to get this cat out of here. Whoa! I think I just pushed Chance off the back of my desk. Hope he's okay. Pam was confused. I've never heard of the secret science thingy. Exactly. So what is it you need me to do? Pam gave him her best I can be trusted look. Not here. You'll need to come to our office. Security and all. His hand came up with a card on it. The card had John Smith, SSS, and an address. What time would be best? This afternoon, 3:45 p.m. Don't be late. And with that, John Smith turned and went out the door. Hilda came clomping down the stairs. As she reached the last step, she continued down onto the floor of the reception area. I'm okay, just missed that last step. Hilda was on her face once more, floundering around like a turtle on its back, only she was on her front. Today she had on one-piece thing that reached all the way to the floor, which meant it was longer than she was. It was purple on the very top, and then indigo, and then dark blue, and the dark blue was followed by green, and then yellow, which was followed by orange. Her way too tall high heels were red. She looked more like a Christmas tree than a healer. Pam felt it was her duty to help get Hilda back to her feet and back upstairs to her room of activity. Hilda was having none of it. No, I'm okay. I just need to... She couldn't get both feet under her at the same time. She looked like a baby giraffe trying to get its legs for the first time. Pam considered telling the healer to take off her shoes, but that was just something you didn't do. Come on, I'll pull as you push. Pam got her arms under Hilda's arms and lifted. Well, that was the plan anyway. Try rolling to the left, and I'll move to the right. They were a tangle of arms and legs. The customers waiting for Hilda sat and watched as the two rolled around on the floor. Finally, Pam got Hilda off from on top of her and used the corner of her desk to haul herself up. Hilda rolled over and came to rest with both feet under her. All she needed to do now was stand up, and I can't stand up. Why? What, did you hurt yourself? Did I hurt you? Pam grew concerned. Should I call someone? No, I can't stand up because I'm standing on the hem of my dress. Hilda had somehow gotten both feet on the bottom half of her floor-length dress. Any attempt at rising would lead to her disrobing in a very public place. It took another 10 minutes to undo the mess. By rocking back and forth as Pam pulled, the dress finally came free. Let's get going before something else goes wrong. Hilda slipped and wound up on her tuchus. I'm good. She pulled herself back up, grabbing the handrail, and with both hands headed upstairs. As she made her way up the stairs, Pam noticed she was limping. The customer was hesitant about following her. Will Cassandra be back soon? It's just that, well, She does such a good job and all. Pam didn't have the heart to tell the customer that Cassandra was in her office right now. Walking back to her desk, Pam felt as if one leg were shorter than the other. Looking down, she saw her moon boot was there on her right foot, but her left foot was now encased in a bright red, super high heeled shoe. Somehow she had traded one shoe with Hilda. A dark shadow went wisping by just as Pam looked up. I see you. You had something to do with this. Pam shook her fist at the shadowy form as it fled down the hallway. This particular shadow was the cause of much mischief around the office. Several people waiting to see Mikey Baba Ganoush and Carol Munchausen tried to act as if they hadn't seen Pam display of weirdness. When Pam looked their way, they all got busy reading whatever magazine they had found it to their interest when they had arrived. The clock over the reception desk showed it was 12. Time to go see Miss Daruka about her ghost troubles. Pam limped into the coffee shop to ask Mr. Techno to keep an eye on things while she had George Zimbalinski drive over to set up the electronic gadgets to see if the ghosts would cooperate and pose for a portrait. George wasn't going to be driving. He would be sitting on the passenger seat and hopefully staying awake long enough to help set up something. He took his usual place in Pam's car and immediately began to snore. All electric equipment had to be stored in the shed out back, the same shed where the company car was parked. Pam had driven around back so she wouldn't have to carry anything heavy from place to place or through the electronic destroying mansion. There were cases and boxes and containers containing all kinds of gadgets used to capture either photographs or audio evidence of otherworldly beings. There was even something called a poltergrabber, sitting on top of some boxes containing old investigation records. It looked as if any time some new device showed up on the market, someone bought one, whether it worked or not. Some of these things were still in their original packages from the store. Pam had been told to grab the black Pelican case so they would have what she needed. Loading them into the trunk, Pam was about to head over to see what was haunting Mrs. Daruka. Wondering what she could do about her latest shoe catastrophe, she removed Hilda's shoe, but now she was lopsided the other direction. Both shoe and boot wound up in the back seat, along with a few boxes of investigation gear. The wind was blowing from the south and should have been warm, but it was not. Weird weather we're having. Pam knocked at Mrs. Daruka's door. She knocked some more. Then she saw the note. Had to leave. Please make yourselves at home. Sharma. Pam tried the front door and found it was unlocked. This feels weird. She hefted the 2 cases of ghost gear and proceeded inside. Her bare feet felt cold on the hardwood floor of the entry. Very cold. Pam looked around to see where would be a good location for the automatic cameras. I'll put one here in the entry and one at the top of the stairs. Pam had become used to talking to herself since nowadays she usually got answers. Kitchen would be good. No, the dining room. Over by the fireplace. Look, if you're not going to help set up, keep your ideas to yourselves. Pam got the tripod set up and went to work programming the cameras. I'd put that in the kitchen. Pam turned the video camera around so it was aimed at the doorway to the kitchen. There, how's that? She moved it against the wall next to the door. Next, Pam walked up the stairs to set a camera up there to catch anything moving about the hallway running to the bedrooms. Never having to decide how to conduct a ghost hunt, Pam just used swag. A swag is scientifically wild guess, and went with her best instincts. You can use your own swag to guess what the A stands for. The next case held a bunch of recording devices. Pam turned them on and set them in several locations to hopefully catch any otherworldly voices that might be heard here in the deserted house. They would turn themselves on any time a sound was made within 15 feet of the mic. Put one of those in the bathroom. Go on, it'll be funny. No way, that's a nasty idea. Who gave you such ideas? Pam wanted to see what other gadgets were there for her to use and maybe abuse. There were 2 millimeters deployed as well as an automatic still camera set in the den. The equipment wasn't so much placed where it would likely catch something as where they fit with the decor. And Chance is behind the camera again. Running around someone else's house felt a bit creepy. Running around someone else's house barefoot felt cold and creepy. Now, with all the building under electronic surveillance, Pam wrote out a note to let Sharma know where everything was and to try to act naturally when moving about her own house. Now to see what we can catch. The air outside was colder than seemed right. The cold sidewalk made Pam's toes hurt as she hot-footed it to her car. George was curled up sound asleep in the car. Jumping in, Pam turned the heater on, just to warm things up a bit. I should have brought my jacket. She could see it in her mind's eye draped artistically across the back of her chair. Cassandra had told Pam to always log in any investigations on her GPS in case someone else had to recover the equipment. Getting her cell phone out and calling up the GPS, Pam noticed she was only a mile from her home. I should run by and get some shoes, but her boots, well, her boot, was at work. All she needed to do was retrieve it from Hilda. George woke up just long enough to state, I was supposed to meet with Manuel in 10 minutes. Could you step on it? And then he went back into the arms of slumber. That settled that. Pam would just have to get her boot back from Hilda. Back at the office, Pam dropped into her chair just before the prince could claim it as his own. She planned to hold on to it for the rest of the day. The clock ticked loudly behind her, so she took a quick look to see what time it was. 3:15. 3:15. As she was supposed to meet Mr. Smith at, oh shoot, I have to run. Pam ran up the stairs to the second floor and straight to room 2C. Without knocking, she opened the door and stepped in. Hilda was moving about her latest customer, waving her hands about as she lifted the negative energy from them. With every other step, she would list to the left side. Excuse me, could I get my boot back? Pam held the red high heel up so Hilda could see it. You have my shoe. Hilda had a look of shock and amazement on her face. Looking down, she lifted the hem of her dress. Oh, wow! All this time I thought my leg had shrunk. Pam didn't know which was worse. Hilda didn't notice her shoe was missing, or she just went with the idea that she was shrinking. How about a trade? Hilda lifted her left foot and immediately fell to her right side. With a crash, she landed on the floor, still trying to work on her left booted foot. The boot came off. Pam grabbed the boot and turned for the door. Then she turned back and thrust the red shoe into Hilda's outstretched hand and turned back to the door. Pam turned back once more and grasped Hilda by the shoulder and tried to lift her from the floor. Hilda was in the process of trying to rebuckle her shoe, and so, since she wasn't trying to help, she came straight up onto her feet. As she was balanced on one foot, and then she wasn't balanced. Hilda fell to the floor with a second crash. Pam didn't have time to waste on elevating this healer. Grabbing Hilda, Pam lifted, then pushed her onto the chair. Gotta go. Pam ran for the room, her boot clutched to her chest. Her feet went thumping down the stairs, nearly colliding with Mikey, who was coming up with his head down. His blue turban was covering most of his eyes anyway. Pam did a ballet move and managed to pirouette around Mikey without knocking him down. She picked up her dropped boot on the landing and made for the door. As she bolted for the parking lot, Ray was right there about to enter. "Ah, Paula. No, Penny? No, Pam. I was just coming to see you. I was wondering, where are you going?" He had his usual confused look. "I have to go. I have an..." Pam was at her car door. "Appointment." She opened the door and was halfway in. "It's business." She got in under the steering wheel and fired up her car. George had just enough time to jump out before she pulled from the driveway and headed over to meet Mr. Smith. George looked at Ray. "She must really love that boot." Ray looked lost. Why would you say that? The way she hugged it to her chest, she really should get some shoes on anyway." George looked up at the sky. "It looks like rain." He walked inside to see about some coffee. Pam pulled up in front of the nondescript building across the street from the Federal Building. As she leaped from her car, Pam met Mr. Smith as he was coming out the front door. He looked at his watch and then Pam. "You're almost late." His look wasn't quite as friendly as his words. Pam still held her left boot in her right hand. "Almost only counts in horseshoes and something else. Let's go. We have a ways to go." He walked towards a black sedan parked in the official vehicle-only parking spot. Pam started running after him and then stopped and went back to get her matching boot, the one held in her hand from the back seat. As she was about halfway to the government car, she had to turn back to get her purse. Now, with a boot in each hand and her purse around her neck, she hoofed it across the blacktop and over to the black sedan. Pam had both hands full of boots and purse, so she had to set down one boot to be able to open the door. As she got in, was hooking up the seatbelt when she remembered she had set her boot down. She opened the door and felt around the ground for her missing footwear. Finally, she had her stuff all piled in her lap and was ready to go. Mr. Smith gave her a look meant to show his displeasure at her antics. "We have a ways to go." He pulled away from the parking lot. "Where are we going exactly?" Pam watched as the city slowly gave way to the suburbs. Then the suburbs gave way to the country. "We are heading to a secret government facility that I'm not at liberty to tell you about. Suffice it to say, it's very secure." He drove way over the posted speed limit. Pam sat and watched the trees go by, wondering if she might catch sight of Bigfoot as they went. They finally stopped in front of an old rusty 8-foot-high gate that led back into the thick wooded area on the side of the road. It looked as if it hadn't been used in decades. The gate rumbled open as if pulled by some ghostly hand, but in actuality it was an electric motor mounted by the side of the road that did all the work. As Mr. Smith drove through the gate, Pam could see several cameras all aimed at the gate from various angles. Some of the cameras followed them as they drove onto the property. The road was gravel, but surprisingly smooth for such a disused path. The trees on both sides of them were thick, but looked as if someone had trimmed them recently. There were no dead limbs or trash anywhere to be seen. After driving for 5 minutes, they stopped in front of a nasty old farmhouse. Mr. Smith shut the engine off. "This is it. I was expecting something more, government-y looking." Pam looked at the farmhouse. It was a white shiplap with multi-paned windows. The front porch needed some of the spindles replaced. There was a porch swing with only one chain, holding it at an angle. "Come with me and don't wander off. There are sentries everywhere." He headed for the front door. The door was locked, but instead of using a key, Mr. Smith swiped a card across the bottom of the mailbox that looked out of place by the front door. With a click, the front door swung open. The inside did nothing to say secret government installation other than the two armed guards sitting just inside. They were both dressed in what the Army laughingly called chocolate chip desert uniforms. One kind of pointed his rifle in their general direction as the other scrutinized Mr. Smith's ID card. He next held out one hand to Pam. "He needs to see your ID," Mr. Smith told Pam. Pam dropped her boots. "ID? I don't think, no, I know, I don't have any. I wasn't issued any." Pam started digging through her purse as if a top secret government identification card had mysteriously been placed in there in her absence. Things began to pile up at her feet, and they were dropped from her overly filled bag. "Show him your driver's license," Mr. Smith sounded as if all of his patience had expired and gone away to someplace nicer. "But that's just a license to drive. It's not really a—" Pam ducked the vehement stare coming from the government agent. She pulled her wallet from the bottom of her purse and dropped the purse as she handed over her license to drive. The guard took her license and scanned it under some machine mounted on the desk he was sitting behind. He then sat there and waited as the computer in front of him did some computing things. When he was satisfied by whatever the computer told him, he handed her her license back. "Let's go, the others are waiting." Mr. Smith turned to the door under the stairs and opened it. Pam expected to see a broom closet and wasn't disappointed. There was a broom, a mop, a dustpan, all hanging from hooks inside the 3-foot by 3-foot room. "What am I going to have to clean up around here?" She smiled at Mr. Smith, who just gave her a bored look. Stepping into the closet, Mr. Smith opened the breaker box and flipped 4 switches, one way and then the other. The room began to move. The closet was actually an elevator. They descended a long time. Long as in longer than Pam was comfortable standing so close to this man she only knew as Mr. Smith, but just knowing was not his real name. The air around them screamed danger. It reminded Pam of Mr. Armstrong, except Mr. Armstrong also exuded an air of confidence. Mr. Smith just gave off danger. When at long last the elevator stopped, the door opened onto a corridor. 2 more guards sat at a desk placed right in front of the elevator door. Mr. Smith handed over his top secret government whatever, and then he looked at Pam, waiting for her to get the message. Once more Pam dropped her boots as she tried to dig her wallet out and find her driver's license. After digging around in the bottom of her purse, she remembered shoving her card into her boot while trying to scrape up all the things she had dropped, trying to do this the first time. She got her boot from the floor, and sure enough, there was her license. The guards never changed their bored expression as they watched her juggling things and dropping most. Once her license had been perused and returned, Pam got some of her things back into her purse and some of her things into her boots and things other than her foot. She felt as if her boots should be on her feet since the cement of the corridor was cold and rough under her feet, but Mr. Smith was in a hurry, so she hustled along in his wake, both arms full of boots and purse. The corridor was long and made from poured cement. The doors were made from stainless steel or something trying to pretend to be stainless steel. At the end of the corridor was a door guarded by 2 more guards. Once more Pam had to dig her license out and keep from being shot. The door they passed through led to a room with a table and chairs set in the middle of a huge room. The furniture looked out of place, being quite decorative and fancy. Around the table sat a few men and women, all dressed like scientists, if you know what scientists dress like. No one had on a lab coat, and none of them held a clipboard, but science was the expressions on their faces. Ah, Mr. Smith. Thank you. That will be all. We'll let you know when we're finished. Uh, shouldn't I stay and keep an eye? No, that won't be necessary. We'll call you when we're finished. The scientists all sat there staring at Mr. Smith until he turned and left the room. Is something wrong? This from one of the women scientists. Yes. No, nothing's wrong. Pam shuffled her armload around. Then why are your boots in your arms? The scientist woman gave Pam an inquiring look, as if ready to dissect her next answer. Oh, I had things going on that got. Anyway, have a seat. We need to begin, and there's lots to do before we can go home. This was from one of the male scientists. Pam set her burden down on the table, and then, thinking better of it, she dropped her boots onto the floor. Next, she had to duck down to grab the items that she had forgotten in her boots that now had rolled out and wound up under the table. The scientists all waited as if her antics were to be expected from someone of her caliber, that being a psychic. Pam got her boots on, and she managed to get them on the right foot as well. Not the right foot, but the foot that was right for each boot. Next, she stuffed everything into her purse that had been scattered about the table. At long last, there's that expression again. When Pam was finally finished with her purse, she sat back and looked at the scientists, ready to begin whatever top secret scientific project these men and women of learning had determined it needed her unique abilities. The woman began. We've been looking into something that needs an answer. That taken so much of our time, we haven't been able to look into other projects needing our full attention. To tell the truth, without knowing the answer to this riddle, the rest of our time here will be meaningless. She twirled a pen while she spoke. Okay, I'm ready when you are. Pam was nervous as to what super secret project required her attention. First of all, we'll need you to sign this secret agreement. The man held out a thick sheaf of papers. Pam started reading the first page, only to get lost in all of the legalese lawyers love to use, so we have no idea what they're saying. Where do I sign? She asked someone willing to answer. There at the bottom of page 10 and 11, and then once more on page 15 through 20. Don't forget the last page, 31. Is that all? Pam was flipping through pages, signing where she hoped was the appropriate location. Everyone gathered around the table thought that was it, but no one was sure since none of them were lawyers or in charge of any paperwork. We'll call it done for now. If there's anything missing, we'll catch it on the way out. Shall we get on with it? This from a somewhat grumpy-looking individual. Right, yes, let's. The scientists all gathered up their papers or notes or whatnot that they had brought along and scattered about. Then they began to file out through a door, but not the one Pam had used to enter. She sat and waited in case there was something else she needed to do. As the last scientist left the room, he shut the door, and Pam was now on her own. If you've enjoyed the story so far, you're going to have to tune in next episode to find out what happens to Pam and what is this super secret project that they have for her. Until next time, this is Chris James for Story Time.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?